We're going to be discussing the structural organization of the body. And as I've said before, sometimes when you're teaching, it's helpful to actually start with the most complex level and then bring it back to a simpler level and then work your way back up. So in terms of structural organization of the body, the most complex level at which the structural organization of the body exists is at the level of organ systems. Now I want you, as you're thinking about organ systems, I want you to think about the structure and the function of each of the systems of the body. Sometimes as you're moving through a class like this one, a lot of the information kind of starts to get jumbled around inside of your brain. And so I personally think it's important to keep your thoughts organized. And one of the ways you can keep your thoughts organized is start to put labels on things and kind of categorize things. And if you're looking at a new word, one of the things that you might want to consider is labeling it either as a structure or a function. And in case it's escaping you, that's basically saying it's either anatomy, structure, or physiology, function. So if you came across a term like the brain, that would be a structure, and the function of the brain is basically cognition. So a thing, something you can hold in your hands and dissect, or look at under a microscope, for example, that would be a structure, and a function is what that thing does. So hold those thoughts in your head, make sure that you're thinking about everything as we go through in terms of whether it's a structure or function. That's always a good starting point for being able to kind of unravel the mystery behind whatever it is that you're studying. So the integumentary system, the structures would be skin, hair, and nails. The function is basically protection, which is massively simplified. There's a lot more things that the integumentary system does, but the skeletal system. The skeletal system has bones, and also the joints or the articulations of the body are all part of the skeletal system. There's a number of different roles that the skeletal system has, but protection and support would be a good start. The muscular system. Of course, when we're talking about the muscular system, we're looking at the skeletal muscles, so-called because they attach directly to the bones of the body, skeletal muscles. And this is usually what comprises the bulk of the muscular system, because other types of less voluntary muscles are usually part of other systems of the body. So those are the structures. When we talk about the function of the muscular system, movement, pretty straightforward. Oh, and heat, by the way. The nervous system. The nervous system is responsible for control and communication. That would be the function. The structure of the nervous system would be the brain, spinal cord, and nerves, both cranial nerves and spinal nerves. So the integumentary system, the skeletal system, the muscular system, and the nervous system, these make up the systems of the body that we'll be discussing in the first half of the class. In the second half of the class, we'll be doing a little bit more work on the nervous system, especially the autonomic nervous system, and then we'll be moving into these other systems as well. So next up is the endocrine system. The endocrine system is made of the structures would be the endocrine glands, which are basically spread all over the body. It is not a nice localized system. There are many different endocrine glands in different parts of the body. The function of the endocrine system is to produce hormones. You should think about the key word with the endocrine system being hormones, and we'll talk about those more down the line. Next, we have the circulatory system, and I combine this together with the cardiovascular system. They actually are oftentimes taught separately, but they are deeply connected together, and so it makes sense to actually put them together. So the circulatory system and the cardiovascular system, this would be the heart and the blood vessels, the arteries, the veins, the capillaries. And the function of the cardiovascular system and the circulatory system is to circulate blood. That's really all that it does. There's a lot more to that particular role. I mean, like circulating blood is a really big deal. That has a lot going on behind it. The lymphatic system is probably the least known system of the body. It includes obscure structures such as the spleen and the red bone marrow and the lymph nodes. And congratulations if you know what all of those things do. You're ahead of most people. So these are the structures of the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system has two roles. One of them is to take all the fluids out of distant parts of the body that are kind of gathering in distant parts of the body and return them eventually back into the blood supply. And the second role of the lymphatic system is to cleanse that fluid as it is being returned. So that is where the immune system comes into play. Basically, the lymphatic system and the immune system are symbiotes of each other, I suppose. The immune system mostly lives within the lymphatic system, and it doesn't have organs of its own, so it's not technically an organ system. The immune system instead is made of cells, of white blood cells specifically, and they mostly reside within the lymphatic system, and then they are responsible for taking all that fluid being returned to the blood through the lymphatic system and making sure that it is free of pathogens and free of weak, dead, infected, or cancerous cells. Next up, we have three systems in a row: the respiratory system, the digestive system, and the urinary system. All three of these have basically the same role, if you think about it, which is to make sure that only the things that you want in your body stay in your body, and to make sure that things that you don't want in your body have a way to leave. So the respiratory system has structures that include, of course, the mouth, pharynx, trachea, and then the lungs, the bronchi of the lungs. The function of the respiratory system is to exchange oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. The digestive system includes, the digestive system is probably the most well-known organ system of the body. It includes things like the esophagus, the stomach, small intestine, large intestine, colon, rectum. We have the liver, we have the pancreas as part of this, the gallbladder. All of these are structures of the digestive system. The function of the digestive system is to break your foodstuffs into the smallest possible component pieces called monomers, and then to absorb them into the body. But additionally, to make sure that waste products do not get absorbed or have a way of getting excreted out of the body through defecation. Lastly, the urinary system. Well, the urinary system is an out-only system. It's another filtration system for the blood. The lymphatic system would be one. This would be the one. So the lymphatic system is in charge of making sure that pathogens get out of the blood. The urinary system is in charge of making sure that waste products such as acids and excess salts get out of the blood. And of course, excrete these things in the form of urine. The structures of the urinary system would be the kidneys, the ureters, the bladder, the urethra. The reproductive system is oftentimes discussed as two different systems of the body. Of course, there's the male reproductive system and there's the female reproductive system. But in many ways, the structures of these two systems parallel each other and have almost exactly the same function. The primary reproductive organs on the male side are the testes. The primary reproductive structures on the female side would be the ovaries, because this is where gametes are produced, sperm and eggs, and this is also where your primary reproductive hormones are produced: testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. And of course, there are many other accessory organs of these systems as well. On the female side, of course, there's the uterus, the vaginal canal. On the male side, there's the penis and the prostate gland, and many other structures, lots of glands, lots of things going on down there. So now that we've listed out all the organ systems, let's go back all the way to the simplest level of the building blocks of all of these structures. We start off with atoms. We've mentioned this previously, so just very quickly: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur make up everything, every tissue of our body. Then, if you take CHONPS and put them into molecules, you can think of any number of molecules. The most common ones you'd probably think of would be H2O, water, CO2, carbon dioxide, O2, which is aerial oxygen, and also how oxygen is transported in our body. C6H12O6 is glucose, sugar. And then we have amino acids, which are technically kind of complex molecules, and then proteins, which are sort of what we'd consider macromolecules. But you gotta mention the proteins in this list with the molecules, even though it's getting to the point where they're, it's almost like their own category, but I kind of put them under the category of molecules. And so we're gonna go ahead and draw one. Do you recognize what it is? It's got that little divot there, a binding site, so it is a receptor. And again, we're going to have this bound into or embedded in a membrane. So there's our phospholipid membrane. And that brings us to our next set of structures. The next set of structures would be cellular structures, such as organelles, such as the nucleus, cytoplasm, and what we drew a moment ago, which is the cell membrane. And guess which one of these we are going to draw? We're going to draw the cell membrane, and we'll draw it in orange as we were, the orange representing those phospholipids. You can see I'm shorthanding it quite a bit here and not drawing them individually. There are the fatty acid tails. There's my cat knocking things over. And those are the phospholipids. You can see we're definitely shorthanding it just with a single blue stripe on either side. All right, the next category is cells. Cells are the basic unit of life. They are the basic unit at which life actually exists. If you took cells and put them into a petri dish and with the correct nutrients and the correct environment and so on, they would grow and they might even replicate. The cell that I'm choosing to draw here is the neuron. This is also called a nerve cell, which I think is a little bit unfortunate because a neuron and a nerve are two different things. You have dendrites, cell body, axon, axon terminal, and a little nucleus right in the middle of that cell body. Now I'd like to spend a little bit of time discussing tissues because it's one of those, it's super important. We're going to do an entire lab on tissues and it gets to be a little overwhelming. There's actually only 4 different types of tissues. There's nervous tissue, which we're drawing here, and then there's muscle tissue and connective tissue and epithelial tissue. So what I'm doing here is I'm drawing just what I drew a moment ago. All those little neurons there. You have dendrites, cell body, axon, axon terminals, and I'm going to just draw a whole bunch of them in sort of a neural network with each other. So tissues are defined as groups of cells working toward a common function. Groups of cells working toward a common function. It may be more practical, though, to think about tissues being a magnification of the cellular function. So a single cell will do just a tiny, tiny little thing because cells are microscopic. You know, cells can be as small as I think the smallest cells in our body are probably around an order of like 5 micrometers in diameter. But they can be very long as well. They can actually be like 3 feet long if you're talking about one of these axons extending down the length of your leg, for example. But for the most part, cells are thought of as microscopic structures. So one cell doing one thing hardly makes any difference to a human being who is much, much larger than that. So what tissues do is they basically take the thing that the cell was doing and then they magnify it into, 1,000 times or 10,000 times or 1,000,000 times or 1,000,000,000 times, depending on what you're discussing. So tissues are taking a cellular thing, cellular function, and making it larger, making it so that it's actually representative of something that is measurable inside of the human body. So if you think of one neuron inside of the brain experiencing one action potential, this is the main physiological function of a neuron, is to experience an action potential. One neuron experiencing an action potential is hardly going to be a blip. It's almost not measurable at all. But if you take 1,000 neurons at the same time experiencing an action potential, now that is something that we can actually measure. And sometimes it's so profound we can actually measure it from the outside straight through the bone. We can actually measure it outside of the body. That's how much more signal is put out when you turn a cell into a tissue. So hopefully when we start to study tissues more, you'll just kind of think of them as extensions of cells, and that might help you to understand how they work a little bit better. Let's move on to maybe the structure that students are most comfortable with, which would be the organs of the body. Organs are defined as two or more tissues working toward a common goal. Remember that tissues were many cells working toward a common function. Organs are two or more tissues working toward a common goal. Note the difference. Here, since we're going with the theme of a neuron and then nervous tissue, let's extend this and let's put some nervous tissue inside of a very familiar structure of the body called the brain. And in this case, I'm going to just draw some cells. Because they're microscopic and we're not drawing them in detail, I'll just draw in orange some layers inside of what we consider this most superficial part of the brain. This would be the cerebral cortex. We will be discussing this more down the line. And it's got several layers to it, so I'll kind of represent that a little bit. I'll kind of draw several layers, kind of what we just drew there, 3 rows of neurons. It sort of works like that. There's about 5 rows of neurons depending on where you are in the cerebral cortex, and so I'm kind of representing that here. So cells are the neurons, the tissue would be the nervous tissue, and then the organ would be the brain, which is comprised of several different types of tissue, but neurons would be a big part of it. Lastly, as we stipulated earlier, we have the organ systems, and in keeping with our theme, we'll go ahead and draw another brain here. This is a lateral or side view perspective of the brain. And I'm also going to extend it to the spinal cord, because if you look at the entirety of the nervous system consists of the brain, the spinal cord, and then sticking out at you and then kind of off to the other side would be the spinal nerves. So these 3 structures, tissues, organs, and organ systems, would be comprising what we call gross anatomy, which is where these are structures we can see with the naked eye. Pretty much everything smaller than this, including cells, cellular structures, molecules, and of course atoms, would be considered microscopic anatomy, structures too small to be seen with the naked eye. Now, technically, cells can be seen with the naked eye sometimes. We have cells in our body that are so large. We have some cells that are actually 100 micrometers large, and that would be something that is actually visible with the naked eye. For example, the ovum, the haploid gamete of the female reproductive system, that can actually extend to about 100 micrometers, which is large enough to be seen with the naked eye. But I think that most of the time cells are considered to be microscopic.